This is the last Sunday of 2018, and I had fully intended to preach, but a story beckoned. I hope that's all right with you. Yes. It's the story of the wise men that we usually tell on Epiphany Sunday, which is January the 6th. But I think we need to hear it today because it calls us to consider how we will live in this coming year. And we need to be able to choose to do that intentionally. Would you agree? Yes. All right. A little bit of history as we begin. Magi is another name for the three kings. It means great ones. Now, tradition says that they represent three groups of people. They are descendants of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, Noah's sons, because they are to represent all of the earth. They often show up in nativity scenes and stories as two white men and a black man because they are to represent different cultures and different regions. And because there are three gifts mentioned, we make the assumption that there are three kings. Now, tradition names them Casper, Balthazar, and Melchior. Melchior actually means kingly one. That tradition didn't arise until the 4th century A.D. There are several ideas of who those wise men were. The most intriguing one suggests that they came out of the ancient Babylonian tradition of astrologers and wise men. How many of you studied the book of the prophet Daniel? That is fascinating reading. If you haven't studied it, I will just let you know today that Daniel was appointed chief of all the wise men, even as an exile in Babylon. The wisdom of God was recognized in him. And the book of Daniel itself contains passages that are in both Hebrew and Aramaic. Aramaic was a common language of the day, and reading that in Aramaic, then we can assume that it was intended not just for the Jews, as the Hebrew would offer. However, it is intended for all. So I believe that that is intended for us today. Would you agree? Babylon was pretty much destroyed around 141 BC by the Persians, and many of her nobles and wise men were taken to what would become the Parthian capital of the Persian Empire, Seleucia. And so it's from that perspective that I've written this story for today. It's fiction. You need to know that. And I'll tell it through the eyes of the wife of one of the Magi. Her name is Mardul, and through those of the eyes of her husband, whose name is Artabian. The rest of the names that are in this are actually Persian as well. They're names that might have been used at that time. They're fiction. Okay? Casper, Balthazar, Melchior, those are fiction too. And so I want to make sure we understand that. The point of this story that I want to tell today is that we might see the seeking of Christ through the eyes of very, very intellectual men. These are some of the world's finest minds. And that we might recognize then the impact of Christ on them and on us. I remember that night well. Mardul? I glanced up to find Artabian's handsome face silhouetted by the candlelight. Awake again so late? I asked. Sit down, Mardul. I would share with you what has kept me awake these many nights. Have you completed the translation, I asked? Yes, several weeks ago. The Aramaic is similar to that which is spoken here in Seleucia. The Hebrew, though, I believe it is correct now. This is the writing of a great man. Daniel, which means God is judge, was his name. He appears to have been a holy man, one who did not care about the politics around him. Small wonder Artabian approved of him, I thought silently. Artabian continued, the writings say that at one time he was appointed ruler over all of Babylon and head over all the Magi. They say that he had the spirit of the holy gods in him, and they even suggest that though he held such a high position, he cared only about his God, the God of the Jews, often defying even imperial decrees when they conflicted with the worship of his God. I shuddered, remembering the stories my mother had told me about the massacre of those Jews who had been carried off to Seleucia after the fall of Babylon. Over 35 years had passed since then. No one was left who could read the scrolls that were left behind. Artabian's family had a Jewish nursemaid who had lived with them until the massacre. And Artabian was an excellent scholar. Even as a child, he remembered much of the language. So when the scrolls of the Jews were finally brought out for study, he was offered an opportunity to study one. He labored over it for 3 years, often lingering over it until late at night. I knew that he had discussed it with some of the other magi. The pursuit of wisdom, like the study of the stars, held a place in his heart that I couldn't begin to comprehend. Marjorie, it's not just this scroll that's kept me awake. I've discovered something in the stars that I can't quite explain. It's a huge new star, and it just appeared this last month. It doesn't act like other stars. I think it's a sign, Marjorie. And I believe it's somehow related to Daniel's people, to the Jews. What do you mean? Nabu, who is another wise man, has been attempting to translate a scroll simply referred to as numbers. I believe it was a part of the Jewish law. When I mentioned that this great star that I had seen in the heavens, he suggested that I needed to examine some of his work. There's a phrase in it that reads, "A star will come out of Jacob, a scepter will rise out of Israel." And it goes on to explain that this ruler, and that's all this star and the scepter could explain, will conquer vast areas around Judea, as it's now called. But Judea is under Roman rule, yes, but it's on the furthest frontier of the Roman Empire, and it's never been at peace. I don't understand. Marjorie, I believe that this ruler has been born. I believe that's the star that I have seen. The book of Daniel was written over 500 years ago. I've been examining the dates in the scrolls of our history. It describes the fall of Babylon when the Medes took over from Belshazzar. Daniel records a strange phenomena that occurred that night. He says that Belshazzar and his nobles were having a huge feast, toasting and drinking out of vessels that had been brought from their God's temple when it was destroyed, when suddenly a hand appeared, writing on the wall. He searched the scroll for a moment and then read, "Mene, mene, tekel, parsin." It means God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end, for you have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Your kingdom has been given to the Medes and the Persians. That's what happened, Marduk. Darius the Mede took over the reign of Babylon. We have his annals. One of his decrees states, "I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end." And you believe that this God has put a new ruler in place? The one described in Nebu's book? I'm not the only one who believes so. You talked about this to the others? Yes. Nabu also believes, as does Andragoras and Phrates. And what of Artaxerxes? I asked. Artaxerxes worships at the altar of political expediency. He is concerned only with that which will bring him political gain. If it is the least bit risky, he won't take part in it. It might threaten his status. But he is the leader of the Magi, I pointed out. Is not true leadership to risk everything to follow what you believe? He thinks me a foolish dreamer. But Marduk, the pursuit of wisdom must not be hindered. He will not support us, but he will not stop us. "So when do you leave?" I asked. "You know me well," he said sadly. "You couldn't rest until you'd searched every possibility. How do you hope to find him? And what of the Romans? We're safe here on the banks of the Tigris, but beyond the Euphrates, what if they think you are Parthian spies? What's to keep them from killing you?" "Marduk, we will take enough gold to bribe the Roman soldiers. We've encountered them before." How will you find him? I don't know. The star seems to beckon. Perhaps it will lead us to him. And so they left a few short days later, taking with them gifts worthy of a king. That was 3 months ago. Judea is only a 30-day journey away, and yet there has been no word. 2 more long weeks passed. And finally, one morning, Amram, their caravan driver, appeared at the door. "We have returned," he said. "Artabian is meeting with the Magi now, but he wanted you to know that he is home." All of them are home, and relief coursed through me. 6 hours later, Artabian himself came through the door, obviously fatigued. He greeted me and then went immediately to rest. He slept until long after the sun had risen the next morning. After he had eaten, he called me to him. "Did you find him? Was it what you expected? Did you bring me a present?" Slow down, Martel. But his eyes were warm and his countenance peaceful. Let me start at the beginning. Our journey took nearly 40 days. Amram insisted that we rest in Damascus. I really think he wanted to go to the marketplace there. And the star did lead us to Nazareth, to Nain, to Jericho, where we bore west. But as we got closer to Jerusalem, that's the capital of Judea, it seemed to disappear. Jerusalem is a stunning city. Their king Herod has rebuilt the temple that the Babylonians destroyed. That's the first thing you see as you approach the city. It's made of white stone and it's covered with precious metal and it seems to shine. But the streets were dark. There was no herald, no banners announcing a newborn king. We expected to find marvelous entertainments, festive celebrations, but when we asked about a newborn ruler, the people seemed to respond in fear. Finally, one of the temple guards pointed us to Herod's palace, and we gained audience with him several days later. It's obvious that he reigns by terror. His manner was polite, but his eyes glittered like those of a serpent. Even more so as we told him about the star. Every eye in his court watched him and us so uneasily. His finery unable to disguise an obviously paranoid mind. When we told him about the prophecies that we had read and the star we had seen, the ruler that we felt sure had been born, he immediately sent for the religious leaders, and it was obvious they wanted to curry his favor. Herod demanded to know where this king of the Jews would be born. Every face blanched. And then they looked to the oldest man among them. Nathanael was his name. In Bethlehem in Judea, he said simply, "For this is what the prophet Micah has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler who will be the shepherd of my people, Israel." Herod's eyes bored into him for what seemed an eternity, and then he dismissed them all, and us, at least momentarily. Later that night, he sent for us secretly, asking exactly when that star had appeared, encouraging us to go seek and to find this newborn one and to let him know when we found him so that he, too, could go and worship him. Nabu and Dragaris, Phraates, and I talked about this strange situation until almost daybreak. We were just preparing to leave Jerusalem when Nathanael begged audience with us. He had news that was not for Herod's ears. He had been in the temple a year and a half or so ago when a peasant couple brought their firstborn to offer him to the Lord, as is their custom. An old man named Simeon went out to greet them. Many thought Simeon to be a foolish dreamer. I know. Simeon believed that the Holy Spirit had prophesied that he would not die until he had seen the one who would rule over all of Israel. Nathanael said, I saw Simeon lift up the child, and I heard him prophesy that this child would be a light for revelation to the Gentiles. That's everyone who's not Jewish. That's us, Mardul. And that he would bring glory to the people of Israel. And that very night, Nathanael said, Simeon breathed his last. Perhaps, Nathanael said, this is the child that you seek. I must ask, I began, he's to be your ruler, Nathanael. You saw this. You knew his birthplace, and why have you not sought him out? You don't understand, Nathanael said. He is but a helpless child now. No one would dare even secretly attempt to seek out a ruler who would replace Herod. He is an Idumean. He has no right to rule Israel. He is of Esau's house. It is Jacob's line who will reign. Herod has been a Roman puppet. He is terrified of the rightful ruler taking his throne. He's even afraid of his own family replacing him. 29 years ago, he had his favorite wife executed because he was afraid that her family, the Hasmoneans, were conspiring to take his throne. 3 years ago, he had 2 of his sons killed, and just a few months ago, he had his firstborn executed. My own time is limited. I saw it in Herod's eyes in the throne room yesterday. I just thought you should know about the child. Come with us, Nathanael, I offered. I dare not. Should I be found missing, my entire family would be wiped out. As it is, perhaps my death will appease Herod. Farewell. I hope that you find this child. And he turned to leave, pausing only a moment to speak one last time. He said this, you yourselves have come as fulfillment of our prophecies. The great prophet Isaiah has said, arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you. Nations will come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your dawn. May you find his light. And then he was gone. We left as soon as we could, relieved to be away from the poisonous atmosphere of that situation. Because of our late start, we got only a short distance before darkness fell, but as we prepared to make Camp the Star, it appeared again. You can't imagine how excited we were. All plans to stop ceased, and we followed it straight into Bethlehem, just as the prophet had said. Its light shone directly on a house of rather modest means inside the city. We weren't quite sure what to do. And so we waited, having noted its position well. As soon as it was polite to do so the next morning, we went to the house. The parents were clearly peasants, as Nathanael had suggested. They spoke Aramaic. And I introduced Nabu and Dragaris and Phrates were Parthian, members of the Magi. We have come seeking the newborn king of the Jews. We told them how we had seen the star, of the writings that we had translated, how the star beckoned us to seek him, and then we asked if we might see their son. They glanced at one another. Then the man, Joseph, nodded, and his mother Mary went to rouse the child. He toddled in, light seeming to stream from his countenance, came right over to us. We could do nothing but fall to our knees. It was the holiest of moments. Silently, we took out our treasures. Some we had been intending to give, others nothing could be withheld from such a one. I even gave him the myrrh that I had purchased in Damascus to embalm my parents. Gold, frankincense. We stayed there on our knees, tears streaming down our faces, somehow knowing that our lives would never be the same. Artabian. I began as I noticed his face, tears in his eyes. I finally asked, what is his name? Jesus. Yeshua in Hebrew. Jehovah is salvation, he translated. Jehovah is the name of their God. I didn't fully understand then, nor do I understand now. But somehow, the presence of the divine, that which had beckoned to us, was in that room. I can't define what happened. None of us wanted to leave, but we couldn't stay on our knees there forever. And so finally, we departed. There was an unspoken agreement between us that we would not go back by the way of Jerusalem. And so we headed west, further still, traveling up the seacoast, until we could turn safely once again to Damascus. As we traveled, we tried to sort out what had happened. And have you? Yes and no. I tried to tell the Magi of the child of our experience, of our encounters, of all the strange coincidences, if you want to call them that led us to him. Artaxis and a few of the others, they still label us foolish dreamers. But the others, I think they wish they too had gone. What will this mean for the Magi and for you? This division, must it not be resolved? Artabian sat deep in thought for a few moments. I do not know. We've always valued wisdom, pursuing it as if it were more precious than jewels, no matter what the cost. Somehow, I believe that the source of all wisdom pursued me. You ask if I had sorted things out. These things I know. That strange star, that light was an invitation to seek. It beckoned to us and all who would see it to come. I believe, as Nathanael said, that the God of Israel himself directed our steps. Why? I cannot begin to know. And I believe that this child is destined to change us all. I know he has already changed me. That strange light, the light of Jesus Christ, yet beckons. It invites us to seek. It beckons us to come, to worship, to be transformed. It is not without risk to follow such a one. Some will label you foolish dreamers, and others will wait to hear. What to do with this remains in your hands. Will you follow? Amen.